Hey, welcome back to another video. In this tutorial it's about drum and bass, how you can produce drum and bass inside Bitwig Studio from start to finish. It's a 2-hour long video and I try to explain along the way my thought process. And it's not like an, that drum bass tutorial, because drum bass is like you have multiple styles in drum and bass, and every producer used to make drums differently, bass differently, as there are different styles of how you make bass sounds, how you make the drums, and how you structure a track like this. But I try to explain in clear terms where you can part in different ways, and on what kind of stuff you need to focus and what's important and so on. So yeah, let's join me on this ride and have some fun. So how do we start making drum bass in Bitwig Studio? And usually I start with the bass first. When I started to when I started making music, I usually started with drums first, but I found that it leads to the same results. So my theory is that how you start a track or how you start a project leads to how it ends. So for instance, when I started to start a drum bass with making drums first, then it leads to the same kind of groove, because I started to make a two-step kind of beat first and then made it in the same way every time. Maybe that's not how you work. Maybe you really enjoy making complex beats, and then it of course leads to different results. For me, it's more like I like to start nowadays with the bass groove first, and then the bass groove leads to how the pattern of the drums looks like. So where I put my kicks, for instance, or where do I put my snares and hi-hats and so on. So the bass groove decides how the drums are sounding. That's how it works for me. It's not something in general. Maybe for you it's completely different, but that's how I work. So I used to start with the bass line first. In Bitwig you can use multiple synthesizers for making bass lines. You can use pretty much everything to make bass lines. So I want to use multiple synths for multiple bass sounds, and then I combine these bass sounds to make some kind of bass riff or pattern. So I start here with the Phase 4. That's my beloved synth for making nice sounding bass sounds. And I probably also want to increase here the main tempo of the project to 172 maybe. You can also go with 170 or make it even slower if you want to have it more old school. Go to 160. So I go to 172. Some people prefer even faster for a 74 or 76 maybe. It's also something I saw. So 72 is a nice middle ground. And everything I do is in the scope of eight patterns or eight bars, something like this. So this is the main block size basically of the arrangement structure. So I create here a note clip first, and I concentrate maybe on this small portion first to just get a nice bass sound running. And usual notes for the bass sound are, in my opinion, on E here, E, F, or F sharp, around this area, right? D sharp upwards. This is most of the times too low end or too deep for bass speakers. If you just want to have some kind of rumble, you can do that too, if you kind of like that style. Some people also have bass lines up here on A, which is pretty high, and it also gives you a lot of overtones from the get-go. If you have, for instance, a sine, just a pure sine wave as a bass, then you probably want to go with higher notes, because it's more audible to the listener when you have it on headphones and so on. And yeah, but I usually go here for kind of E or F. And the good thing about E is that when you start with E and use all the white keys, as you can see here, you're automatically in the scale of E Phrygian, which is pretty nice for funky bass lines and bass grooves. So you will see. So I prefer E here as a starting point, and maybe just make here a long note to create our first bass sound. So let's play this. So we are already here at the right frequency. Let's add here an EQ to see what's going on. So we're already here below 100 Hertz, which is nice. So we can even go lower. You can either go here to E0 with the ratio at 1:1, or you go to E1, that's what I usually do, and then switch here the ratio to 1:2, which is just half of the frequency, so it's an octave lower basically. And I switch this here maybe to sine, and only this operator is active at the moment. So we only hear a sine wave, or you probably can't hear anything if you use headphones. But on a normal speaker you can hear this pretty clearly, or can feel it basically. So what we need to do now is to create overtones, because that's just a pure sine wave. There are no overtones, as you can see here. It's just a pure sine wave. You can also use an oscilloscope here to see that. Just zoom in here. Yeah, it's pretty pure. So overtones you can create with distortion. You can use the drive knob, as you can see. It's overdrive, and you create some harmonies here up here. What you also can do with the phase 4, the output or the voice gain, that's how it's called, has also some kind of clipper at the end. So it clips the output, which also creates overtones here. So you can already create with this nice bass sounds without touching any of the operators and only using a sine operator here as an oscillator. So you can already do pretty much just with this. Maybe we dial this here a bit back, so we still have a lot of low end. Something like this. It's still overdriven. It still creates harmonies. So let's bring in here the operator B. B is blue, and you can see here's a blue knob, so we can mix in this operator into this operator. And by mix in, I mean this operator modulates the frequency of this one. It's not just an audio mix, it's an modulation mix. So we modulate the frequency of the red operator. So something like this. And now we can change the ratio of this operator here. Get maybe a frequency 1 octave higher. And we also want to slightly detune it. You can already hear it sounds like a real drum bass, right? So detuning gets in some movement, as you can hear. When it's at 0 here, it's pretty static. When you bring in the detuning, then it's brings in some movement, right? So all you need to do is basically modulate this here, and you get a nice yeah, nice movement. Let's go with the, let's see, let's do the classic LFO maybe here. Note retrigger, so every time we retrigger this note here, we start in the same phase and modulate this here. And this is also something here. Usually back in the days I would classically synchronize here the LFO to a tempo, right? To a time base, 1/4 or 160, which is something you can do. It's not a problem at all. I still do it. But I really like to have the LFO running completely free and use hertz, which is not synchronized to anything. And you can clearly dial in your own frequency and, you know, go by ear and listen to it and then settle with the frequency that's creating a groove that you like. That's okay for now. We probably play around with this later on a lot when we have the drums ready and also maybe another bass sound ready, and then we kind of want to find how everything fits together, and you tweak this a lot probably. So we have a nice basic bass sound patch running here. Maybe I'll go with the sustain all the way up, or maybe not, maybe like this. And I also click here on the front of the phase 4 and go to voices and go to mono. So just pull this down, click and pull down, and you get your voices mono, which now is the phase 4 in a monophonic mode, which means when you play 2 notes at the same time or play a chord, only 1 note plays. So it's monophonic, which also helps by creating patterns when you have, for instance, accidentally overlapping notes. This note here is then cut off and this note is then playing, right? So you can accidentally overlap notes and you have never played 2 notes at the same time. Something like this, right? So okay, maybe we duplicate this here and say double content. So now we have this 1 clip again, but we have double the size and the same content. And maybe we remove here this, so we make a small little change up. So we have only this note here in this section. As you can see here, this is also nice here with the E Phrygian. We start with the root note, and then half step above the root note is again a white note. So which is great in drum bass in general, using basically half-tone steps. You can also go here for maybe this, which is not in the scale of E Phrygian, but in drum bass nobody really cares. We go straight for the sound, how something sounds. You shouldn't care that much maybe for harmonies or for harmony theory in general. If it sounds good, then it's good. It also maybe depends on what kind of style you want to produce, right? If you go for liquid, which is more like an main theme or main harmonics chords and a chord progression, then you maybe want to stay in some kind of harmony theory or some kind of scale. But if you go for some Techstep or some neurofunk, then usually harmony theory goes straight out of the window and you go straight for the sound and only frequencies and how it sounds. So let's listen to this here. So we have this. Maybe we can bring in some interesting things here. Let's go with the pitch modulation, and maybe we can do here an ADSR. So every time the note triggers, we trigger this ADSR here, as you can see. And maybe we modulate the pitch by 1 octave, which is plus 12. Let's see. But we only want to have this on the first note. and we can use automation for this, or we can use the steps mod here, and say 8 notes. It's exactly now how long our bar is here, 2 bars, our clip. And we raise this here, and we go into here and put this to 0 and create your +1. Maybe go to smoothing here all the way up. Okay, so now we have basically this ADSR modulating this pitch here only on the first note or the start of the sequence. So this is a small little change up. So this is basically what all we do. We create a simple pattern, and then we alterate this pattern in simple, small little ways to create interesting, complex patterns in the end. But we start with a simple pattern first. So this is how I approach it, at least. So maybe we can also change here the speed of the LFO depending on where we are in the pattern. So let's say we start, or this is our main frequency here, 1.29 Hertz. But we want to change this over time here. So I go with the, so I click this, and then I have here the line in here. You can see it shows also 1.29 Hertz. And then maybe I want to speed up the LFO at the end here slightly. I can delete this. So just a slight change up here and there. Okay, so now that we have this, maybe we can also change the shape here over time. We can also use automation for this. I really like to do this with automation, but you can also use a steps mod for that. I show you both ways basically. You can use steps mod and automation, and maybe click this. And also we can use this star symbol here to show all the automations we created. So let's go with the shape here. Maybe change this over time. Okay. We also maybe can duplicate this here, make this even longer. And here we maybe change the speed of the LFO even more. Maybe we remove this here. We select both and can use Control and J to combine these two clips into one clip. Yeah, maybe we just leave it at that. Okay, so now we have a nice little sequence running here. To make this more interesting, I just click here this track and use Control and D to duplicate this, so we have the same bass pattern, twice. And the second one here, we go into that and delete all that. And the first one, we delete the first note here. And for the second bass here, I'm using also phase 4, but I change different things here. So I want to have a kind of a small different sound for the first part. So maybe we switch this up to a saw. So yeah, maybe we go with the shape. Draw in here, modulation. Maybe we change here the LFO, the rate. Let's use all of this. This is the rate here, okay. Something like this. So it's all about creating, interesting patterns. So now we have basically our first small bass thing here. Maybe we check here also the volume on this. We go to 0. Here also to 0. Maybe we group this together and call this bass. And what we need on this bass group is of at least a tool device here at the end, so we can change the volume. So we can see we exceed here our ceiling. So maybe it's time for some audio processing, and I use here an FX2 on the bass. For all two bass sounds, they are usually more or less the same. And I use a split frequency of 300 Hertz because when we remove here the high frequency, you have a lot of nice little low-end content. And we can go in the low section here and say maybe with the tool device, make the low end mono if we want to. We don't need to. It's actually it's monophonic, and it's we have no stereo information here at any point. So maybe I just leave this in here just to show you how it's done. And in the high band here we go with an EQ2. This is also what I use a lot. And then we go for high pass, and we can change here basically the cutoff frequency. And what this does is basically we have now information, low-end information up until 300 Hertz, and then we have a notch because of this one here until we hit the ceiling of the frequencies. So you can carve out basically the middle of your track where your drums are, and you get this nice little drum bass soundish, high-endy bass sound. But we have the low end and the high end in the middle is completely cut out for the drums. And it still sounds fat. It sounds like there is something in the middle, but it's actually not. So it's more like how it's called. I don't know how it's called. It's an acoustic phenomenon, so it sounds like something is there, but it's not. So now we can put on here some reverb. We can you can hear when you use the diffusion at 0, it sounds more like a delay, because reverb is delays with multiple different reverb times, delay times. And in drum bass, you can do a lot of stuff that's usually not allowed, or audio engineers say, please don't do this. For instance, using distortion after reverb. And because we only add this here at the high end, on the high end box, we completely leave our low end untouched. Maybe just mix it in a bit. Can also bring in maybe chorus. Okay, so you can put on all kinds of effects on here, just how you like it. Nobody cares really, and I saw people going to, yeah, to the extremes with this kind of stuff here. We can also use an EQ plus here, maybe. Yeah, bring in some notches here and there. Yeah, maybe you can modulate this. Why not? So LFO, beat LFO, and frequency modulation here. Finding here the right frequency, which, you know, sounds nice. So this is also something you can do. You can modulate here the reverb. It's going with the mix knob. Maybe we want only to have reverb here at the start. So it sounds more dry. And at the start, you know, you have more like a wet signal. Okay, so that's that. So now we have here a nice little bass line running. We can go back here to our first patch. And what I also like to do with these operators here is to bring in noise. And there is no noise in the phase 4, but you can kind of create noise by using here the yellow operator or any other operator and mix in the operator to itself. So operator Y mixed in with operator Y to 100%, which creates pure noise. It's completely chaotic. But then you can bring it into operator red here. Okay, so it gives you noise basically mixed in. And this one then goes to the drive here, to the overdrive, and then we have also here a clipper at the end. So it sounds pretty distorted then. Okay, but you can also mix it into operator B here. So what we maybe can do is we modulate, as you can see here, operator B into it. Maybe we make default this. And then we use this here to modulate it out. So it's basically the opposite modulation. So when this one comes in, the noise goes out, and when this one is out, the noise comes in. So it's basically back and forth. That's something we can do. Oh, this also sounds nice. Maybe we also modulate this here. We haven't. Let's see. Maybe not too much. Okay, I think that's it for the bass line for now. I don't want to make it too complicated. You can completely, yeah, go crazy with this kind of stuff here. Sometimes I make tunes here with 4 or 5 of these phase 4 layers with different settings for each instrument. Sometimes I use different instruments, different synthesizers for different tracks and layers. This is just one example, and maybe you don't want to go that crazy with bass sounds, then you usually just need to use, for instance, polysynth here. Just to show you this real quick. You can create a clip here. Let's go to E. Maybe here. Yeah, let's go with this. You have a low little saw. Maybe we can use here unison. But we bring this one down, the stereo spread down, so we have it monophonic in the middle. And because it's not really monophonic now, you need the tool. Bring the width down. Bring the drive up. You get this nice little deep Reese hover sound here with the polysynth. Maybe go here to 1 octave higher and use the glide here. Right, you can create these typical Reese sound, bass sounds. And then go to 0. Everything into a peak limiter. Maybe you can also go here with the FX2. Maybe we use this here for some part, or in the at some point in our arrangement could be useful maybe. The chorus only. Oh, it's the wrong one. Maybe also reverb. Maybe an LFO here, just to bring in some movement. Also, it's monophonic, yeah, nice. So this is our Reese bass line here, and maybe we use this later on. Just to show you how you can make a bass with a different synthesizer. Okay, so let's move on to the drums here. We muted everything, and the drums is it's basically it's a whole chapter, a whole 5-hour video, because there are so many different drums in drum bass nowadays. How we can make drums: you can use classical drum loops first, then layer in synthetic drums, or go only with synthetic drums, or create your own drums by layering different kick sounds, different snare sounds together. Just using samples from some sample services, also a viable option. So there's so many options in how you can make drum sounds, and I can only show you one way basically in this video, or in the scope of this video. You'll probably find a lot of tutorials on YouTube how you can make drum bass drums. And how I approach it usually is, or to show you what kind of situations you need to focus your attention basically is, when you have a bass sound here, you want probably to have your kick drum around 100 hertz here, or above 100 hertz, because usually below that you have your main bass frequency. So you need to have some room here. And then what people usually do is a high-pitched snare up on here, 1K, which is the main frequency of your ears. Basically, it's perceived better at this frequency. And usually when you call someone on the phone, the phone is usually just having a bandpass here on this frequency, just because your ear perceive loudness in a special way at 1K. So yeah, let's start with the kick drum. And I start here pretty basic with the E-kick of Bitwig Studio. I also use it every time. And let's bring in here one note at the start. And it doesn't matter at which note you are. It's not dependent on the keyboard, so you can just paint in any note at any point. And yeah, go to the E-kick here. And I usually tune my kick drum to G0, right? So you can see here, you can also just type this in, G0. And then you add perfectly 49 hertz. And I don't tune my kick drums to the root note of the bass or of my tune. I did this multiple times, but I found it's not really, it doesn't give you any, it has more drawbacks than it has benefits. Because then the kick drum sounds like it's part of the bass sound or the bass line, and then you can distinguish the bass, and you can't distinguish the bass and the kick anymore. So it sounds like one thing, and maybe that's exactly what you want. But usually you want to have a kick that's snappy and accentuates the bass at the start and at certain points in your pattern. So I usually go here with G0, even though our bass line is on E0. And I have here a pitch mod of maybe 19. Caps lock. 19. And 19 because it's 7, 7 and 40, and then 7 again, and we are at 19. So it's basically 3/5 stacked. You don't need to use 90, you can also use 20 or 21. It's not really important. It's just my, I don't know, fascination with numbers. That's my usual numbers I type in all the time. So 19, it's basically a 3 times stacked fifth. You can also maybe go with 24, which is 2 octaves higher. I go with 19. So it pitches down basically from 19 semitones up down to the root note of G0, and how fast you can decide here by the decay setting. Right, this is all the way up. This is way bass soundy. And this setting I usually tune with my bass sound. So I want to have my kick drum stick out from the bass a little bit. So you can see, you can barely hear the kick drum here. It's usually also because this is too loud, and I usually go here for -4 dB on the bass. So maybe we need more overtones, right? So you can do more overtones by bringing in the decay, so we have more high end or more of the higher frequencies of the pitch modulation. And we can bring in here EQ. Cut down or cut off here a bit of the low end, because we don't need that. We only need the knock here around this. And this is audible to the ears, and maybe we get some high end here. Okay, and then I usually go for FX2, which is the same technique as we used in the bass line. And then I put in the high end here a frequency shifter, which alters basically only the frequencies above 300 Hertz. And maybe you can bring in distortion also here, just to the top end. See, it becomes pretty knocky. So you want to have the kick drum stick out a bit to accentuate the bass. But it's not like that you want to have, you know, maybe the bass drum too heavy and dominate the whole mix. So it's you have to find the sweet spot, and the sweet spot, it depends on what kind of style you are going for. For instance, in liquid funk, you have more like a pronounced snare drum, and the kick drum is more back. It's more reduced. And then you have neurofunk, where you have a very heavy, fat kick drum sometimes. Sometimes it's a pretty short kick drum, and you only hear basically barely the transients. And the bass line dominates the mix. So it depends on what you are going for, right? You have to find a sweet spot for your style and what you are going for. And everyone has different tastes and preferences and so on. So this is how I approach it. I just want to give you basically a rough guide on what you need to, on what kind of things you need to focus. Okay, what we can do now is we can also dial in here maybe 1% of difference between the left and the right channel. So the left channel is frequency shifted slightly differently than the left channel. So we have some kind of stereo effect. So top end of the kick drum is a bit, you know, stereo left, right. Makes it a bit more interesting, but you can barely hear it. So we have the kick drum, and it's perfectly tuned to the bass, which is important in my opinion. It's not so important that the kick and the snare and the hi-hat works together. It's more important that the kick works with the bass and the snare works with the hi-hats, I would say. So you have to not group it by a category like drums together and, you know, bass together. So it's more like the bass needs to be fit with the kick and the snare needs to fit with the hi-hats. So now we can find here some nice spots for the kick drum together with the bass pattern, I would say. So this is a typical two-step beat here. Maybe something like this. So we accentuate basically the bass line to make this pattern even more supported by the drums. Let's see if this works out. I don't know. Okay, snare drum. You can also use it, the snare, E-snare by Bitwig, but I usually use samples for snares because we want to have some kind of dirty layer on top. So we can search here in our sample library for some kind of snares. You don't need to have special snares. You can use some, I don't know, some drum bass sample packages from the internet, download something, or just use some random snare samples to bring in some dirt. What I also usually like to use is rim shots. It's also a nice tip. Hey, my own samples. Yeah, I don't know, something like this. You can bring this in, drag this into the tracks section here, so we can create a sample. And then we need to disable the key track, which is a bit annoying, and Bitwig introduced this at some point. So every drum sample you drag in is key tracked. And this means when we play in here, we can pitch it. But I usually don't like that, so I disable this so we have the same pitch at any key. And yeah, let's paint in here at 1, 2, 1, 4. This one here. So we have this layer, which is kind of okayish. Maybe use a peak limiter, so we hit, scrap the ceiling. Maybe use an EQ, yeah? EQ, Q. So it needs more high end, and this is something you need to learn, basically, what kind of frequencies you need to focus, and how it needs to sound, and it takes time. I know that. I instantly can hear what the sound needs, basically, in my opinion. But you gain this experience or this knowledge over time, and it takes time. So I know that I want to put here now my E snare, this one here. Maybe track this down here to the same track. So maybe just click here the sampler, hit Control and G. So now the sampler is in a rack, in instrument layer. And we can put here our E snare in there. Bam. We can delete this track. So now we have a sampler here with the rim shot and the snare on the same track. And now we need to tune the E snare to match basically our rim shot. So I go for oscillator 1, which is this section here. Maybe tune this down so we can. You only want to have a pretty short sound. In general, all drums and drum bass are pretty short. They are barely go beyond the transient nowadays, just to crank out the loudness and only let the drums do what the drums do best, and this is accentuate the bass or the groove. This sounds maybe nice. Maybe bring in, what can we use here? My hard clip preset. Makes it pretty nice, knocky. Maybe bring the hard clip also here on the complete, so on the sum, basically on the rim shot and the snare together. So we have it in the FX box here. Maybe use an EQ here again. Maybe bring in some white noise. Something like this, I don't know. This is usually something you can tweak for hours to find the right settings. But when you have the right settings, then the rest of the tune is basically easy peasy. So it's like getting the fundamentals right. and then the rest of the track is not that hard anymore. It's just working out the structure and you know, making the usual things. So now, because of the rim shot sample, you have some dirt in there. It's processed and it's probably recorded with the drum set. And to support this dirty sample, we use here a pretty clean E-snare synthesizer, which is probably just a sine wave generator. Maybe make this a bit shorter. Or maybe use a different sample here. Okay, hi-hats. You can use the E-hat also here. Probably better is to use some hi-hat samples, because the hi-hat sounds always like white noise. In some cases it works. So let's paint in here a pattern. Or maybe use just one note and use the arpeggiator. Make it maybe 4 steps. Have like this. We have here the velocity sensitivity you can bring up. Then we can draw in here a nice little groove. Something like this. Bring this out, add some expression settings here, and we can use the velocity to change decay. Maybe it's now time to bring in here the global groove a bit. Need to make this a bit louder here. You can hear? This is without groove. Let's bring in the groove. Okay, so this is one way of doing it. So we group this together here and call this drums maybe. Maybe I don't like the snare at all, but that's normal. To find the sweet spot here with everything. Okay, so we have a nice bass here, and maybe we call this project drum and bass tutorial. Bam. So what else can we create? So I'm searching basically for sounds I can add and to create some kind of pool of patterns I then can use to flesh out the structure, right? So I'm build patterns and sounds and new tracks just to have a nice pool of sounds. So maybe we can create some percussions here. Maybe search for bongos, I don't know. Something like this. And I think we did this also with the last tutorial, with the melodic techno thing. I used the drum machine here and just drag in some percussion samples. Something like this. And then I use macros here. Go into the cell, bring everything down in one cell, and say copy value to all layers, copy value to all layers, copy value to all layers. Use a modulation here to the decay setting, and say copy modulation to all layers. And now we can change the decay of all samplers in all cells. And we need to create, of course, here a small pattern. And this pattern goes completely random like this. Just like playing all samples. Maybe you also use macro here, bipolar, and go for the pitch. Because the global groove is active, it's already shuffling. Maybe frequency shifter is also nice. Delay is maybe too much. So something like this. This is something we can use at some point. Let's call this percussions. Maybe we need some atmospherics, right? So let's go for the polysynth here. And we know that we are at E, so we can just use an E here. Draw this in. Maybe unison. Maybe low cut. Maybe an LFO. Beat LFO is it's also okay. Modulated the cutoff. And again, I go here completely unsynced because I like the organic feel of that. Maybe a reverb. Maybe a bandpass. Maybe mix in the second oscillator here. Yeah, maybe we use a random modulator here for the pitch. Just a touch. Make the smoothing up here. 3. Polyphonic bipolar. Now it's modulating into pitch. Maybe it's too fast. it's too low. Maybe you need it way up here. Oh, it's... And we can also bring in here this note, which brings some dissonance. Maybe E again. So you have to find the sound that's, you know, that fits your track. This is pretty old schooly here, I would say. Maybe you want to have not that dissonant of a sound here. Maybe to go 1/5 up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Something like this. Maybe let's try out the respace here. Maybe better. Maybe use this here for a different sequence. So maybe we can use now on the bass here a tool device and the sidechain, note sidechain, and modulate the volume down. So make this pretty short. Bring in the kick here. Every time the kick comes in, we, make the bass sound quieter. Yeah, we can modulate this or automate this later on then in the track to bring more movement in. Now it's okay. That's a bit uninteresting here. Maybe we need something in there here that brings in a bit more interesting parts. Maybe I go for XO, which also something I like. And bring in some random snare samples. Let's see. something like this. Maybe EQ at the low end. Some kind of swing. Okay, so we can just bounce this here as an audio file. Just forget the rest. Okay. I think this sounds better. Maybe it's something like this. Okay. So maybe let's move on here. Move this over here. It's a bit longer, or maybe twice as long. You can see here we are in our 8-bar kind of block size. So I want to change everything every 8 bars. So maybe we start with this one here. Then we switch to a section where we have only percussions. And we can support this with the bass line here with the cutoff, so we can say when there is some kind of pad sound, we want to have the bass more toned down, and then when we switch to percussions, we want to maybe open up here the frequencies a bit more. 500, yeah, back to 500. And maybe we make this more expressive here. We go up there, way down, up there, down, up there, and just duplicate this. Maybe we also introduce here some EQ. Do we have this already? No. Let's use an EQ plus here. Okay, let's modulate around this frequency here. LFO. We can also use a filter. It's not, you don't need to use the EQ plus. That's okay. Also -4. It's my magic number for basses. When I have the bass basically at the ceiling of the peak limiter or at the track itself, and also the drums. Let's see, it's bring in a hard clip here again. Clipping at 0 dB here for the drums. And this one is also at 0 dB. Then I bring down the bass by 4 dB or 3 dB, and it's usually pretty fine for me in terms of mixing. I think it needs some distortion. So, yeah. So, I'm trying basically to max out the frequency distribution of the bass. I want to have a nice fat little low end, or fat low end. And yeah, the high end should be in this, at least in this track, I want to, the high end pretty much up front. And then I try to match it with the drums, which are also pretty loud. And they should be equally loud, in my opinion, the bass and the drums. So it's drum bass, right? You need drums and bass up front. So you try to pronounce the frequencies from the bass that you really need, which is the low end and maybe the mid-range modulation. And the drums, which is the knock at around 120 hertz, and the snare drum, where at whatever hertz you have the snare drum. In my opinion, yeah, it's a pretty high-pitched snare. It's around here. 300 hertz, yeah. Yeah. So what I usually do with the drums, I make them as loud as fuck. As you can see here with the hard clip, I pretty much clip the shit out of the drums. It also depends on what kind of sound you're going for. For liquid drums, you maybe want to tone down the clipping of the drums. Or some more like, you know, toned down drum bass, you want to have this. Maybe you want to have some pretty drastic drum funk shit, you pretty much crank this up or make it loud and distorted. So it depends on the style. Oh yeah, what I also like to do, which is kind of a trick, I would say, in Bitwig Studio to balance the frequencies, is using the FX3 and putting a limiter in all in all boxes here, which is just a multiband limiter. But instead of limiting everything the fuck out and make it flat as possible, I just try to increase the input here until something scratches the ceiling. which makes every box or every frequency section here equally loud in terms of peak volume. Let's hear the low end, this one here. It peaks, it barely scratches here, the limiter, so it's not limiting at all. In the middle part here, we can also just go a little bit into the limiter. High end, there's a bit of room here. And then after that, I'm using a hard clip here and limiting everything until it sounds distorted enough and loud enough. You can see here with the setting at 4.5 dB per octave tilt, it's pretty much straight. The kick is maybe a bit too heavy because it's basically a bit too long. You can hear it's super meaty and heavy. So just shorten the kick drum here helps sometimes. Right, you don't want to have something like this which takes a lot of room away from the bass. Just want to accentuate the bass. Maybe let's measure this here, just for the interest. So short-term loudness max minus 6.4 dB LUFS for the drums. There's also something you can do. You can put on the dB meter or some kind of LUFS leveling some LUFS meter on some groups and sounds, and measure the sounds and then remember certain numbers. This is helpful sometimes to get consistency throughout your tracks, right? You know this when you make multiple tracks and then at one track the drums sound completely different in loudness in terms of frequency balance than in another tune. And yeah, it makes me pretty mad actually when something like this happens. And yeah, just using a meter here at some point, some meter you like, and measuring the loudness of different sounds, and then remembering the numbers helps sometimes just to bring in consistency into your mix downs. And it doesn't need to be the same number every time, right? You need to be obsessed with having the same number. It's just that you are roughly in the same area. And yeah, here I completely don't care for the number, right? I just go for the ear. I look that the sound is not too distorted and also not too clean, because the drum bass, you need some dirtiness, some roughness in there, right? Okay. So let's move on here a bit. So the drums are loud enough, I think. We have the Reese bass line here, which is okay, I think, how it is now. Oh yeah, maybe we need to cut here also the low end of the high box a bit. So now we have basically here in the chain of the Reese, we have just a tool to make it mono. We have an EQ here to make this notchy sound here in the top end. And then we have the splitter. In the low end, we have a tool with 0. In the high band here, we have a lot of modulations, chorus, reverb, the EQ setting here, the roll of the low end, a distortion only in the high end now. And at the end, we have a limiter to control basically the output. And we have the sidechain thing here, which ducks down the volume every time the kick plays. Maybe a bit too much. Okay. And we bring this to 0, and we use this here for -4 dB. Okay. Okay, so now we have this. Maybe we bring in some more percussion elements. So, for instance, a ride. Always nice. Something like this. Bring this here. So we just changed basically some percussion elements here to keep it interesting over a long part or long periods of time. Because nothing really changes in the bass, in the patterns itself. This. Switch off the key tracking here, and it's looks like it's heavily panned to the left, so bring it the width down. Now all you have to do is basically keep it interesting, which is hard to do sometimes. But here, just bring in some different drum shots. Right at this point, we have this snare here, or this pattern. Or actually, I need to remove that. Just cut this here so it doesn't duplicate to the other tracks. Can move this also over here maybe. And maybe here we bring also different snare pattern in. Something like this. Alternate between the two. And also here. Maybe we also create some kind of riser. And I usually go just for polysynth here. And we can crank up the noise all the way using bandpass here. Draw in a long note. Doesn't matter which note, just one note. Right, so we have here the noise. Only this. Use a macro control. Macro controls here the filter, maybe also the resonance. Maybe you can also use an LFO, and the beat LFO is perfect for that, I would say. Let's see. Crank also the LFO speed up, and then the LFO modulates maybe this one here. No, this doesn't work. I go over this. Let's see. It doesn't sound that good. Maybe just leave it at that. Put the reverb on it. Just fade in the volume here over time. Macro, okay. Fade in. And we have this small little fading happening here at the end of the section. Yeah, that's, I think, okay for now. Maybe you need some kind of crash symbol. Yeah, let's go for 909. Bring this in here, key tracking off. Just need it here at the first. Maybe high pass. Reverb on it. And what I also like to do is here to use the crash as a rough guide for the 8 bars, right? So you can make this exactly 8 bars long. Then you can loop this. Then you have a perfectly guide where you know, oh, exactly every time this crash happens here, something needs to change. So maybe we put this over here. Put this over here. Maybe we use here the second bass line on this point. So let's see how this sounds. Oh, it's muted. Put hier Peak Limiter. What happened to our noise here? Oh, I see. And the second part here, we use the second fret. It's also a nice trick, just exchanging the sounds sometimes. Yeah. It's an easy trick. Oh, maybe change up the pattern a bit. Right, so just changing up here a bit the percussion elements helps sometimes just to keep the song alive without changing the groove or the bass sound at all. But you can do this too here, of course, change the bass sound a bit over time. We also did this here with the respace, right? We introduced here some modulations here and there. Yeah. So now we have already here past nearly one minute of playtime without getting bored too much. Okay, maybe it's time to duplicate this here. And now we have 1 minute 25. And this is probably our first part after the drop. So the drop is at 65. Right. But before we do that, we just group here some sounds together. So this is FX percussions. This goes into the drum group because it's a crash. Percussions maybe also in the drum group. And we call this group here just music. We call this here bass. And maybe we can do here, can move this tool device on the group. And you can remove it from this track here. And we can also remove this one. So now we can group the bass and the drums together and call this drum and bass bus. Because usually this is more heavily compressed than the music bus, because the music is just, you know, more like, should be more like dynamics, or we want to leave in some dynamics in the music and crank up the volume on the drum bass bus. What we need here is a hard clip at least. And we can crank this up a bit here. And you can also use here some tools like Unfilter from Synaptic. And this balances out the frequencies here automatically. So this is with the drums, with the Unfilter. This without. way too loud now. Maybe we need something here at the end of this section that's a bit more special than what we have now. So maybe go for different. And also maybe we pitch this down here. So we go into the synth, click the pitch, and just, you know, pitch it maybe down to -5. Right, so we can copy this over here. Over here, bam. So yeah, back to our drum bass bass here. I just used Unfilter. I can use tools like this on here, but you can also just leave it there and maybe use an EQ and just balance it out by ear. Or you can use the same trick as before using my FX3 thing here, putting in peak limiter. And this is also nice to check here the levels. As you can see, this is basically now, you can see the kick. The kick here pretty clearly, and the bass, where the bass level is, right? So the kicks stand out from the bass pretty heavily in the low end here, up until 284 Hertz. Maybe we can increase here the loudness of the bass a bit. -4 is maybe too much, -3 maybe. So just level this out here until it scratches the surface again. Peak here. It's also good. Peak. Oh, we need to bring up here the pitch again to 0. Of course. Like this. Okay. Now we have it. Remove this. -0. Go back here. Yeah, it's okay. As you can see, we are pretty loud here already on at the drum bass bus. It's maybe too loud. It's -4.7, and we haven't done anything really to, you know. There's not a crap load of plugins on there. It's just hard clipping and EQing, and yeah, it's not even a compressor on there. Just by balancing out everything, you get easy loudness. You can also always go back here to your kick drum here, right? And see maybe it's still too long. But I think it's quite okay. I just put in your limiter so we don't exceed the 0 dB on the bus on the track. It's not really needed, but it's you know, habits. So now we have this pad synth here, which is a bit boring alone, so maybe we introduce some melody shots or some interesting bits here and there. And we know that we are on E, so we can use here E. So let's create here an interesting sound. Reverb. Maybe delay. So let's use some keys, white keys, until it sounds mysterious or, I don't know, funky, depends. And general rule here is also using as many half steps as possible. It doesn't sound too melodic, too, you know, cheesy. Something like this, then duplicate this, and these are basically now questioning and begging for an answer. And to answer this maybe with a different sequence. This, a different sound. And here maybe we change the something like this. It doesn't answer every time, so remove these. Low cut here on the music because we don't need no low end here. Maybe you also can change the kick pattern. Or we change the kick pattern here and in the first section. Yeah, something like this. You know, like this until here. Then we start a different pattern. Also, what's a nice thing to do is making some surprising switches in the structure. For instance, here, right, we expect the tune just behave normally, but just at this point here, just bring in the kick and remove everything else. Just delete this here. Just leave in the snare, the hi-hats, the ride, it's crash, and we can leave this in. You can also make here a bass change. Just now we can what? Right, so you have a different sound here, and the expectation then surprises you, or your expectation is differently. So you basically clone this small section what we created in the beginning. You clone this the whole track, and then you edit small little details here and there to surprise the ear or the listener, and make some small change-ups to the sounds and to the rhythms, to the patterns and so on, just to keep it interesting. That's all you do. It's basically just work. It's not that big. There's not much creativity there. I mean, you can put in a lot of creativity in terms of what you do and how you do it, but it's not like that it's just work, in my opinion. You need just to flesh out the tune and make it longer and keep it interesting in various ways. Okay, so we have a drum bass bus, we have a music bus. We can group this together and call it all. And I do this because sometimes I use A/B comparison. So you can put in here maybe a song. Do I have something here? Probably not, right? So I can put in here a track, a reference track, right? A ready production or a tune you like, and you want to compare it with your own tune. And you can do this without having stuff on the master, because when you have your a reference tune, it goes also through the master, and then you have maybe a limiter on there, and it gets compressed too. So I have everything on here, and here's my reference tune at some point. Then you go to the mixing page and bring A/B. Say your tune is A and the reference tune is B, and then you can switch between the two, right? And can quickly basically judge if your tune is far off from your preferred production quality. But that's just how I do it. Yeah, on the master, what to do on the master? Maybe a Q just to control everything. Maybe just a peak limiter. Or we use another hard clip that does basically not really that much. Oh, it will do much. So here at this point we are at dB meter -6 LUFS. Yeah, the master chain is it's a whole different story for itself. What you do to your audio production then in the end, and I want to go not too deeply into this in this video. But for now, I just want to focus on that you get a nice sounding, loud drum bass tune easily. And I hope I made this kind of clear in this video. I just want to show you how we proceed now. So we have now the drum bass bus here and the music bus together and all, and we can now easily move here the whole thing around, right? And we have to focus now on the intro, and the intro is the next hard part because it's completely different than the rest of the tune. The rest of the tune is just cloning this section here and, you know, keep it interesting, as I said. But in the intro we have to completely support the tune here just without bass line and anything. Maybe just have here this one, bring in the melody bits at some point. Tease the melody. Tease this. Build up with fade-ins and different sounds. Maybe we want to bring in a vocal sample or something like this. And the intro is not easy. Maybe we want to automate here the modulation amount. The frequency maybe is a bit lower. It sounds a bit cheesy, but it's a lot of work to actually make the intro uncheesy and interesting at the same time. Maybe we want to also bring in here some hi-hats. Let's see. Maybe we duplicate the hi-hats and do a different pattern. Can remove this here. You know, I have something for the DJ to mix. Kind of metronome. Maybe make it this, or maybe bring in also at the garage. It's maybe too much here. What you also can do is, which is an easy way, maybe sample the bass line here. Sample this then high cut it and put it in the intro. Bounce. Bring this in here. Put on it. Random. Just quiet in the background to prepare the listener what's coming. Yeah, intros, it's not easy. You have to make a lot of sounds and fade-ins, FX sounds, vocals. Another trick I can show you for drum bass is also the trick of nudging the bass pattern around. For instance, when we have here this section and you get bored of it, you can just say, just delay the whole thing by maybe 1 bar, or not a bar, maybe 16th notes or 2. So this is also something a lot of producers do sometimes. Just create a pattern, and when you think it's not groovy enough, then just nudge it around, and you can go all the way up until, yeah, maybe you can also right, like this. Maybe you can do this here in this part, because we have the same thing. Maybe just delete this and say, let's move this over here, and then we cut the end here off and put it in the front, something like this. Right, so you have a different groove, it's the same groove, but it feels different. Just we can duplicate this over here and maybe say here, we do the same again, put 2, maybe 2. Let's see. And cut the rest off. Here, put this in front. So you get kind of interesting grooves and patterns without doing too much, or you can use it to make an alteration on alternate version of your initial bass groove that doesn't feel too different, but it's, you know, it's different. Or it's different enough to keep it interesting. Let me clone here these two, and now we have your part that's completely different than this one, but still sounds the same. Hey, the second part is not too. I don't like it too much. Just stick with the first one. Yeah, that's how you do it basically. That's all there is to it. Maybe there's at some point here some mid part. Oh, we are already at 4 minutes here. Maybe at the 3-minute mark here, you want to have some kind of break. That's what most tunes do at this point here. We have maybe some kind of elements from the intro, maybe also only a hi-hat here, maybe a fade in here to go back into the tune again, maybe some of the chord elements here. That's maybe too much, too long. It depends on what you want to do again. And then you go back into the tune at some point. So we're already over the 2-hour mark. I think I'm closing down here because the rest is basically the same thing over and over again. Like I said, you clone the patterns you created over and over, make alterations, keep it interesting. The mid part is the same as the intro, more or less. Then the outro is also the same as the intro, just slightly different. It's all about changing things up and just keeping it interesting with new sounds or with the same sounds and different patterns. And you can also do a lot with FX sounds, transitioning sounds like I did here with the noise fade in. You can also make some sweeps and impacts here and there, and it does a lot to the track actually. Instead of just changing the patterns of bass and so on, you want to have this continuity throughout the track, to have the same bass sound and the same bass pattern, so the listener thinks it's still the same track. But you can do a lot with these FX sounds to transport or to keep the track alive, basically. Okay, and I think that's it. Yeah, I think you can also download this then in the description of the video. I mean, this project, this is here in let's see, this is in beta 3 4.1, so you can download this and play around with it and, you know, look into it and have some fun. Thanks for watching.